It will be our goal and aim to deliver as much as is possible of the agenda for which we are seeking a democratic mandate in this election. This is Northern Ireland's opportunity to contribute and shape British life like never before. It's an opportunity for Northern Ireland's voice to be heard in London like never before. This is our opportunity to stand up for Northern Ireland like never before. And only a strong, united team of Democratic Unionist MPs will have the numbers, the strength, the commitment and the vision to actually deliver for Northern Ireland. The DUP standing up for the Union, standing up for unionism, standing up for Northern Ireland. We give that commitment today, and it's our commitment for the next 5 years. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our party leader and deputy leader for outlining the issues before you, the DUP Westminster Manifesto 2015. Can I say to the press that we certainly will welcome and give the opportunity for one-to-one interviews with either party leader or deputy leader after this part is over. But there may be questions that you have now, so therefore, if you want to pose those questions, you're welcome to do so. Yes.
Could I ask Peter Robinson, do you fully expect, or DUP fully expect to be involved in the negotiations after May the 7th? And are you saying that DUP support could be on an issue-by-issue basis and not really attach yourself either to the Conservatives and Labour for the full 5 years?
Yes, thank you, Ken. I think a lot of commentators, perhaps until recently, had concluded that the moment of truth would come immediately after the election, that the parties would look at the numbers, form some kind of arrangement, and that would take them forward for at least some years into the future. I think the scenario that you're painting is far more likely. I think that one or other of the two main parties will say we are moving forward as a minority government, and they will seek throughout their period in office to garner sufficient support for the key votes that they will have in that Parliament. Whether it is the former or the latter that turns out to be the truth, we know from our experience in Parliament that we have been able to extract for Northern Ireland real benefits for our single votes on occasions. So while we're happy to talk about long-term support for a government, we're equally prepared to talk to any potential government about the prospect of a vote-by-vote support.
Hello, Liam Clark, Belfast Telegraph. I listened to the speeches with interest, and Peter Robinson has pointed out that you won't get all you want, and that's obviously clear. Now, imagine after the election that the leader of one of the main parties calls in Nigel Dodds and said, I've read your concerns. I see that you want a nuclear deterrent, you want air passenger duty, you want legislation on flags, you want Northern Ireland an economic powerhouse. Can you give me just three demands, three wishes if you start, that are your top demands, is parading one of them, and we can work from there.
Peter?
Thank you, Liam, but no. I'll give you 45 wishes. We've laid them out in our Northern Ireland plan. We will go in and negotiate. We'll see what each of the parties is prepared to do to help Northern Ireland to realise its vision of the Northern Ireland plan. But we're not going to prioritise those matters. It would weaken our hand in the post-election negotiations. So look at all 45. We will go in to get as much of that agenda fulfilled as is possible. Sorry, I can't hear you. No.
Liam, we'll just move on.
See you after, Liam.
John Manley from the Irish News. The manifesto seems a bit ambiguous about a EU referendum. Does the DUP want an early EU referendum, and why doesn't it say that in the manifesto?
The DUP does want an early referendum. I think after so many years, the people of the United Kingdom have a right and entitlement to have their say in relation to Europe. And we want to strengthen the hand of the Prime Minister in any negotiations. For people to be saying now, as some are, that it doesn't really matter what the Prime Minister gets in any post-election negotiations to improve our position in Europe, we're just going to go along with Europe as it is. That doesn't help. We want the strongest position within Europe. We want a better deal in Europe. And if the Prime Minister is able to negotiate that, then we will make an assessment after the election on what he has been able to bring forward. But we equally say that unless we can improve our position as far as Europe is concerned, then we are prepared to consider leaving Europe. And that is a distinction between us and some of the other parties.
Peter, Mark Devonport, here at the back. just really picking up from Liam's question, aren't you asking for a bit of a blank check from the voters if you aren't prepared to say this will be our most important issue in entering into these negotiations? You've got such a big wide raft now to choose from that in a sense it's a bit of a blank check you're asking for from the voters.
But no matter how wily you are at asking the question, we simply are not going to get ourselves into a position of indicating red line issues. We go into negotiations. There will be issues in both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party's manifesto that we would want to see toned down. There are issues that we would want to see strengthened. There are matters in our Northern Ireland plan that we want to see added in. There are issues that we would prefer that no government would go forward with, and our votes, depending on the arithmetic, might make the difference in those circumstances. So this election is quite unique, and I recognise perhaps frustrating for many, particularly in the press, because it won't be until after the election and we see the arithmetic in Parliament that we will know the strength that each of the parties' votes will have, and therefore our strength in any negotiations. So we're not saying that we have priorities, we're not talking about red line issues, we're saying this is our agenda. Which party is prepared to ensure that we have implemented the largest part of that agenda?
Peter Robinson, Jerry Moriarty, Irish Times. You're hoping to have more strength at Westminster after this election. I'm just curious how East Belfast is going, how you see it. And also, if you don't retain the seat, do you think it would have any implications for your own leadership?
Well, there have been people in the Irish Times and other newspapers that have been prophesying my doom for many, many years. Indeed, some of the commentators said that I would never become leader of the Democratic Unionist Party. All of that is quite incidental. It matters not a jot who is the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party. Whoever is leader will be taking forward this agenda into the next election. And if you want to know how well East Belfast is doing, look at the broad smile on Gavin's face.
First Minister, Sam McBride from the newsletter. You've said a lot here about how you're going to spend public money, everything from more spending on health, education, abolishing taxation on some air travel. How are you going to raise any of this money? Is it simply going to be following the Labour model of the last Labour government, more public debt?
Well, first of all, probably the larger part of our Northern Ireland plan is about values, is about processes, about making changes that don't require funding at all. There are elements of it that do require support. There are others that are seeking the government to do things that don't have a price tag attached to them. But every party is looking for some improvements to the way finances within the United Kingdom, our spending plans are dealt with. We have indicated, as Nigel said in his comments, that we want to see real-term increases in both education and in health. But that forms a large part of what both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are already saying. So there probably isn't an awful lot of additional cost in us supporting them in bringing forward those proposals. There are other proposals that clearly have a price tag, just as there are proposals in the main parties' manifestos. And we have recognised that it will be the spending plan and the tax raising plan of the main party that forms a government that will obviously we would have to be in a position to comfortably support. So we're not saying that we're not prepared to see tax rises. We're not saying we're not prepared to look at spending cuts. We're saying in our manifesto that any spending cuts should not be in the hypothecated areas which are covered by the Barnett formula, because our expenditure here in Northern Ireland, as in Scotland and in Wales, is so tight that it can't take further cuts.
Mr. Robinson, Seamus McKee, who are the economists who've calculated that there's only £1 million of difference between the parties' plans as they affect Northern Ireland? And does it not depress you that neither Labour nor the Conservatives apparently see their plans as being significantly better for Northern Ireland if there's only £1 million of difference between them?
Well, we're talking about economists within the Department of Finance. It is our department. That department regularly updates its prospects in terms of future years on the basis of what governments and potential governments are saying. We asked them to carry out an analysis to see how Northern Ireland would be placed after the election, and it does come out very even. As far as the prospect for either party, we have to recognise that there is £1.5 trillion of debt in the United Kingdom. We have a considerable annual deficit. It is in the interests of the United Kingdom, and I'm a unionist and therefore I have an interest. I'm not like some of the other parties who released their manifestos and are simply saying we want to spend more, tax less, and even borrow more. I want to see the deficit run down. I want to see debt being reduced, and to do that I think there needs to be a responsible attitude. And I think all of those, leaving aside the cranks, who do want to see the deficit reduced will recognise that there have to be controls over the next few years so that real growth can take place. The easiest way to reduce the deficit and to reduce debt ultimately is by growth in our economy. Growth means more jobs, it means less people on benefits, it means more money being spent in our high street, it means more income tax, it means more VAT. All of those add to the wealth of the nation. So that's why we particularly say that we're looking for economic growth in the United Kingdom as a whole and in Northern Ireland in particular.
First Minister, the number one demand in the Northern Ireland plan is more satisfactory terms in relationship to corporation tax. What are the deficiencies in the current legislation and what improvements do you want?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
What improvements do you want?
On what?
On corporation tax,
well,
as compared to what they have negotiated now.
First of all, I won't characterise it as the number one demand. Where it's placed in the plan doesn't indicate any degree of priority. It's an important issue. It's an important issue because we're trying to rebalance our economy. We are very heavily reliant on the public sector. We need to have greater growth within the private sector. One way of encouraging that growth is to have a lower level of corporation tax in the rest of the United Kingdom. And it helps us to compete with the Republic of Ireland as well. If we are on a level playing field in terms of corporation tax, there are other significant benefits in the offering that Ireland has to potential investors that will make the best deal in Europe coming to Northern Ireland. As far as what difference we're asking from what's available at the present time, the Treasury, as the Treasury usually does, has put forward a proposal which has been accepted by ministers, which has been legislated for, which effectively says whatever money we lose by way of corporation tax because you're offering a lower rate, you have to make up out of the block grant. What they don't say is that any additional income tax that we get in because you bring more jobs in, any additional VAT, any additional national insurance, any reduction in the benefits, we're going to take all of that ourselves, say the Treasury. And we're saying that if we're taking the downside, then we should have a share of the upside as well.
Thank you very much indeed, First Minister, and thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. I trust you have the rest of a good day, and if there are one-to-one interviews that are desired, you're welcome to speak to Mr. Robinson or Mr. Dodds. Good day.